Good evening. Tonight, we are looking at a topic that is actually, at least in my list, it's on the broader list that we've been covering of hard topics. Now, that's kind of strange because this topic is clearly all throughout the Bible, and if you went back just a couple generations, then the preaching that you were likely to hear was called Fire and Brimstone, and it was preached about hell and the need to avoid hell, which is true, which is fair. I don't characterize tonight's lesson as being fire and brimstone, but it will talk about that because it will be talking about hell. And so we're going to take a look at this topic, also this place, and we're going to see exactly what is so bad about hell. And that might sound like a really obvious answer to the question. We know that it's a very bad place, but what makes it so bad? We're going to look at it from a few different perspectives. But let me also say, starting out, in 1 Corinthians chapter 2, verse 9, there's a statement that's made by Paul. 1 Corinthians 2, verse 9, if you want to turn there, but the statement is about heaven. And Paul says, "Eye has not seen, nor ear heard, nor have entered into the heart of man the things which God has prepared for those who love him." Let me suggest that the opposite of that is just as true. The idea is we can't imagine how great heaven will be, and we can't imagine how terrible hell will be. And we're going to take a look at that perspective tonight. And it's not the most positive lesson, but it's a needed lesson. It's a biblical lesson. It's something that we certainly do want to avoid, but we want to serve God and end up in heaven all the more so. But let's start with this question. What exactly is hell? And that might seem kind of simple too, but what exactly is it? Well, number one, we have to say that it is, in fact, a real place. It is real. And a whole lot of people don't believe in it. And even a whole lot of people that believe that heaven is real don't believe that hell is real. That really can't be the case. If God is the God of the universe and he created heaven, then he also created hell. If God's word is his message to man and it tells us about heaven and hell, they both have to be true. We don't get to choose which one is true, which one is not. So both must be accepted. One other fact about hell, which is kind of strange, is that it is a created place. So hell has not been in existence since before the beginning of time, but it was created. We're told that it's a place that was prepared for the devil and his angels, just as heaven is being prepared for us, but it wasn't always in existence, but it is now. And it will be for the rest of time, it would seem. Another question, and this answer is kind of complicated, but the question is hell a physical place or a spiritual place? And the answer, of course, is spiritual. At least it's the quick answer, because it's the place where souls go after death. Well, souls are not physical. And yet, just like with heaven, we see many physical descriptions, even more physical descriptions of hell than we do for heaven. And maybe physical is not quite the right word. It's kind of a convenient word for us to use because we understand it. But another way I saw it described in some things I was looking at is sensual, not the way that we use that sometimes, but as in it relates to the senses. So it may not be a physical place, but you'll be able to feel it. You'll be able to smell the burning sulfur. You'll be able to feel the heat that is all around you. You won't be able to see because it's utter darkness. So it acts on the senses, even if it's not a strictly physical place. Sometimes I'll use the term physio-spiritual to try to get an idea of something in between what we understand to be physical and what the Bible here describes as something spiritual. And certainly, it does help us to understand the severity of hell when it's put into terms that relate to our physical experience here on earth. And the same thing is true of heaven. There are times when the Bible relates heaven as if it were a physical place rather than spiritual to help us understand a little bit more about it. Besides all of that, in Matthew chapter 10, verse 28, it says, "And do not fear those who kill the body but cannot kill the soul, but rather fear him who is able to destroy both soul and body in hell." There is some sense in which our body, not this body, but the body that's resurrected with us, that is talked about in 1 Corinthians chapter 15, will experience some kind of sensations in hell that are described throughout the Bible. So is it physical? Not exactly. Is it spiritual? Yes. but there are certainly physical or tactile components to what will be experienced there. And then the other question for us is, what is the purpose? Why does it exist? Now, for heaven, that's pretty easy. It's a place of eternal reward, but I think that the answer is the same. We can answer it with the same ease to say that hell is a place of eternal punishment, and that's what it's designed for. It would be somewhat fair to call it a prison, but it's not exactly a prison. In fact, I would liken it more to a death camp of Nazi infamy, because it's not just a place to hold people, but instead it's a place to torture people while they're being held. So it's a place of eternal destruction, as we just saw in Matthew 10:28. It's a place where there will be eternal suffering. It's a place of active punishment, not just the sort of time out that prison is. I know it's worse than that, but it's more than that. It is an active attempt at punishing those who have done evil. Now, as we talked about from Matthew chapter 25 and verse 41, hell was prepared for the devil and for his angels. So it wasn't designed for humanity, and yet humans will end up there. Why? Well, even though it wasn't designed for humanity, some humans choose to follow the person that it was designed for. Some humans decide that they're going to follow alongside Satan. When they do that, when they live a life of sin, then the natural consequence is that they will be punished right alongside the person that hell was designed for in the first place. And it was designed for Satan because he deserves it. He deserves every bit of it. And those who follow him also deserve it, but he deserves every kind of punishment available. He is the mortal enemy of God, but he also is the most evil creature that has ever existed. And everything that he does is wicked, and everything that he does is in direct opposition to God. I don't know how much we appreciate the vileness of Satan, but he is terrible, and he deserves to be punished, because every bad thing that's happened to you in your life, well, he caused it. And he caused it for the last several thousand years as well, and he'll continue to cause evil to happen as long as he exists. So eventually, God will cast him into the abyss. It's talked about in Revelation chapter 19 and 20, and that will be the eternal fate of Satan. Now, this is a fair system. It is just that humans even will go to hell. We don't always think of it that way, but at the same time, it is, because it's 100% avoidable as well. If we couldn't avoid it, and God just decided whoever he wanted to send there would be punished eternally, that would be one thing. But we can and should avoid it. And we'll talk more about that as we go on. So exactly how bad is hell? Let's start with this. How does the Bible not describe it? We'll get to the description. But how does the Bible name hell? What names does it give to this place? Well, the first one is hell. That's the one we use most often. And I don't actually know if it's the one the Bible uses most often. I didn't check the count of all of these words, but Hades might make a bigger appearance than hell does, at least with Old and New Testament. But the name hell, well, the word hell, the name hell, comes from not Greek, not Hebrew, but instead comes from German. So it's a newer word, and it's come into English through German, and the word means to hide. And that seems kind of strange, maybe, but it means to hide, or to kind of put out of sight. And there's a certain sense in which we can understand that describing hell, and it does. And it's actually very similar to an Old Testament word that's used and sometimes quoted in the New Testament, which is from a Hebrew word, the word Sheol. Now, Sheol can mean the grave, or the place of the departed dead, but it also can refer to this place that we're talking about, the place of eternal punishment for those who are lost. But that's another name for it, Sheol, and it means that which is unseen. So far we have something that means to hide, and something that means that which is unseen. What else do we see? There's also the name Hades. Hades is directly from the Greek, really directly from the Greek. The Greek word is Hades. It's spelled the same, essentially, if you change the style of letters that are used. But it means, or it meant for the Greeks, the realm of the dead. And again, that could kind of mean just the place where all dead people go, but it also did have a pretty negative connotation. And there's another word that we'll talk about that gets a little bit worse than that, but it was a place for the dead. Another word that's used, not very often in the Bible, but a word that's occasionally used to describe hell is Gehenna. Now, Gehenna is another Hebrew word, it comes from Hebrew, and it means the Valley of Hinnom. Okay? Well, what is the Valley of Hinnom? The Valley of Hinnom was a physical place on earth, actually it's still there, but at the time of the scriptures being written, the Valley of Hinnom was, in modern terms, a dumpster fire. And it really was. It was the place where all of Jerusalem would throw all of their trash. Not only their trash, but their dead animals, and sometimes people that they'd murdered and wanted to hide somewhere. And generally all of these things would be set on fire. So there was a valley of garbage and decaying bodies that was on fire. Does that sound like a pretty accurate description of hell? There's a reason that it was used, that name was used, because it was a very physical representation of the more spiritual place of hell. But it does the job in explaining it, at least if you know exactly what we're talking about. One more word that is used very seldom, actually I don't know if it's used outside of Luke 16, but the word is Tartarus. And we don't use that word often at all, but the Greeks use that word as not just synonymous with Hades, but instead Tartarus was a place that was supposed to be below Hades. So below the place of the dead. And Tartarus was a place specifically for those who had died that were wicked. So it was a place of eternal punishment. And it was described as a sunless abyss that was below Hades, where the wicked were eternally punished. Okay. So that would explain why that term is used as well. All these go just to describing a little bit of what hell is like, just based on the names that are used for it. But what does make hell as bad as it is? A few things. First being physical pain, or physio-spiritual pain, or some kind of sensory-related pain. Regardless of what our bodies look like at that point, they won't be the same bodies we have now, but it's something that is described in a physical way. So how is it described? Well, it was described in the text that we read for us a few minutes ago. And a few things in this verse. It says that once the tares are gathered, we have to look at the broader context of the parable to see that the tares are in fact those who are wicked, who have hidden themselves among the righteous. But they will be burned in fire at the end of this age. And beyond that, it says that they will be cast into the furnace of fire, and there will be wailing and gnashing of teeth. So fire, of course, is used very frequently to describe hell. And then also this phrase is used quite a bit by Jesus, that there will be wailing and gnashing of teeth, or weeping and gnashing of teeth. And I think that's straightforward enough, but wailing, even from the original language, means to cry very loudly. Not just a couple tears roll down the face, but to cry out in either emotional pain or physical pain. Of course, in this case, it would probably be physical, although also emotional, as we'll look at in just a second. And then also the gnashing of teeth. What is the gnashing of teeth? Well, it's an involuntary grinding of your teeth as the result of pain. Most of us have probably not been in enough pain to really have that happen, but it is something that does happen. So that's part of the description here. And again, that's a physical description of something that is more spiritual than physical. But it does its job in getting us to understand how this will feel. In Luke chapter 16, we're going to look at a couple of passages here in Luke 16, if you want to turn there. Luke 16, verse 23, it says, "And being in torments in Hades, he lifted up his eyes and saw Abraham afar off, and Lazarus in his bosom." Verse 24, "Then he cried and said, Father Abraham, have mercy on me, and send Lazarus that he may dip the tip of his finger in water and cool my tongue, for I am tormented in this flame." That is about the most physical description of something that's not physical that you could give. But the description is, he is in flame, engulfed in flames, and that he would give anything if someone would just dip the tip of their finger and put a drop of water on his tongue. I don't ever want to be in that position. There are people that have been physically on earth. If you find yourself lost in the desert, you might feel like that. But it would be pretty hard to even imagine this situation where your greatest desire is that someone would do something that insignificant to ease your suffering just slightly. And yet that's where the rich man in this story finds himself. One question with this: what's the worst pain that you've ever felt? The worst physical pain you ever felt? C-section. Yeah, okay. C-section, birth, yeah, those would probably be up there. For me, it's probably surgery. I don't know what it is for you. Maybe broken a bone, maybe whatever it is. But there's a lot of things on earth that we can experience that are very painful physically. How do you think that compares with the pain that would be experienced in hell? It's nothing. It's nothing. Multiply it by 10, multiply it by 100, it still doesn't touch it. Not the way Jesus describes it. He describes it as being beyond our ability to bear. And so there is a physical element to this. Whether or not it's exactly physical, we could debate about, but it is an extremely painful place to be. Another comment I'll make with this is, it says that he's in this flame, as in constantly in this flame. We'll see in some other verses that you are tormented forever and ever, which sounds pretty bad, but we recently, Olivia and I, have used the phrase that we take our comfort very seriously in this household. And when we say that, either we're talking about getting food, because that's always fun, but also we're talking about, I don't keep the thermostat anywhere except where I want the thermostat. If it's a little bit too hot outside, my thermostat's not going to change. It's not going up just because it's hot, and it's not going down just because it's cold. And regardless of what the electric bill is, that's fine, but I'm going to be comfortable. In hell, you would never be comfortable again. Ever. At no point will you be able to say, I feel better. It won't happen. No relief. Ever. And again, just as someone that likes to be comfortable, it just won't happen. And that's kind of scary to think about. But that's just the physical side of things. There's two more elements to this. One being the mental component. Still in Luke chapter 16. Luke 16, verse 25. It says, But Abraham said, Son, remember that in your lifetime you received your good things, and likewise Lazarus evil things. But now he is comforted, and you are tormented. And besides all of this, between us and you, there is a great gulf fixed, so that those who want to pass from here to you cannot, nor can those from there pass to us. Verse 27. Then he said, I beg you therefore, Father, that you would send him to my father's house. For I have 5 brothers, that he may testify to them, lest they also come to this place of torment. Mental anguish. I don't know how it would compare with the sensational pain that he's feeling, that anyone is feeling in hell. But the mental side is pretty bad too. The emotional side of it is pretty bad. Why? A few things just from this text. Number 1, it says, in your lifetime you received your good things. What's the implication? You will never receive any good things again. Everything that you had that was good is behind you. You have nothing to look forward to. You have no hope of things getting better. Everything that you had that was good, the last bite of cake you had before you died, that's it. That's the last good you'll ever experience. And nothing will ever get better. And you have that knowledge constantly. This will be eternal suffering, eternal torment that will not let up. Second, it also says here, describes here the situation of this great gulf fixed between these two places, where apparently, at least from the side of torment, you can see across, and you can see a little bit of what's happening in heaven. I don't know exactly how this works. I don't know what you can see and what you can't see, and I don't know if it's a two-way mirror or if you can only see one way. I don't really know what's going on. But what I do know is that the rich man is aware that there are people that are better off than he is. That there are people who aren't suffering like he is. He's at least aware of Lazarus, who was a person in his own life that's in a better place than he is. And he can see that, but he can't do a thing about it. Sort of a look, but not touch. He can see it, but that makes it that much worse. It's bad if you're in a place where you're in constant pain and misery, but it's even worse if you can see somewhere that's better than that. You can see the greener pastures over there, and for all eternity, it doesn't matter. Even though you can see it, you won't be able to get there. Third thing, and this one's maybe the most painful, and I bring this up if ever we're talking about people that are hesitant to obey the gospel and to believe the truth because their parents believe something different. Their parents would say this. They would say the exact same thing as the rich man, which is, ooh, if I could do it over. If I could do it over, just at least let my children be faithful and let them enter heaven. Even if I wasn't able to, his one prayer after he realizes, one, that he can't get out of here, and two, things aren't going to get better, he says, okay, if I can't have that, my only desire is that no one else that I know has to come here. And that would be true of the parents of someone who's now debated whether or not to obey the truth, but that is one of the most painful emotional parts of hell. That you're there for eternity, but even just in the short term, you're waiting on more people to come be exactly where you are because you didn't prevent that from happening. There's nothing you can do now to prevent it. So there's a lot of mental pain that happens here. So we kind of said this already, but in Revelation 20, verse 10, it says, the devil who deceived them was cast into the lake of fire and brimstone, where the beast and the false prophet are, and they will be tormented day and night forever and ever. It will not stop. And again, from a mental perspective, though, knowing that it will never get better, knowing that you have no hope, nothing to look forward to forever. It's a depressing place, and it's kind of depressing to talk about too, but it's the reality of what's described in the Bible for us. Also, just to mention, because I did say we talked about fire and brimstone, so in this verse, it's one place that we see the words fire and brimstone paired together. Fire is easy enough to understand, although in the original context it may mean lightning more than it means flame in the case of fire and brimstone, because fire would sometimes be used to describe what fell from the sky. Brimstone, of course, was used by God in the case of Sodom and Gomorrah. It's burning sulfur, which burns at, I don't know what temperature, but really, really hot. It would melt through most things, including your own skin. So it's those two things paired together. Pretty bad description, but it's the same kind of description that we get with the rest of everything we're talking about. But there's still one more component to this. Let's talk about it quickly to say that there's a spiritual side to this. A spiritual component that makes hell all the worse. Maybe worse than the physical, maybe worse than the emotional, the spiritual. In 2 Thessalonians chapter 1, verse 8, it says, in flaming fire, taking vengeance on those who do not know God and on those who do not obey the gospel of our Lord Jesus Christ. These shall be punished with everlasting destruction from the presence of the Lord and from the glory of his power. Now, at least in the New King James, I don't know how this stacks up with other translations, it's kind of missing a word here, at least from the original language. It's not, but it is. If in verse 9, it says, these shall be punished with everlasting destruction from the presence of the Lord. Well, the Greek word for from is apo, which really means apart from, or away from, or separate from. So, even though it's not an incorrect translation, it does mean from, it has the implication that it is apart from something. Well, in this case, what are we talking about then? That the people that are punished in hell will be punished apart from the presence of the Lord. God is not in hell. We remember the promises in Revelation chapter 22 that God says that he will be there, and he will be their God, and he will dwell among them, and all of that. That's not true in hell. God's not there. He won't be there. He'll never be there. And for us, I don't know if we can even appreciate that exactly, because we have never lived apart from where God is. Now, God's not exactly here on earth in the physical sense, but we've never taken a breath without God being part of our existence. And I'm confident that 1 second without God would be all it would take for somebody to repent. 1 second away from his presence. Remember James 1:17 describes God as the giver of every good and perfect gift? Take that out of the picture. What's left? Nothing good. Nothing perfect. Hell is a place where there's nothing good. There's nothing perfect. And God is not there. And that may be the worst part of hell. Probably is. But God will not be there. So sure, there will be physical, somewhat physical, punishment that happens, torment forever. And there'll be all the mental issues that you'll have of knowing that you can't ever get any better than this. Nothing will get better than this. And you can't do anything to help those who are already on their way to join you. But God won't be there. On the cross, Jesus, it would seem, and we're not getting into this, but it would seem that the moment that God turned away from Christ, that he was separated from Christ, Christ quotes from Psalm 22, verse 1. He says, my God, why have you forsaken me? And up to that point, Jesus was handling everything okay, considering the circumstances, but that was kind of the breaking point. Say, okay, now God isn't even with me. And if we were able to experience a day or even just a second without God, what difference would it make with our faith in him, our reliance on him? But it's a place without God. So, what do we learn? A few things, real quick. Number one, hell is real. It's real. It is absolutely real. If God is real, then hell is real. If heaven is real, then hell is also real. If the Bible is true, then hell is real. We don't get to decide that. God has already told us hell exists. It's there. And it's a place that people will go. It's a place that we could go if we choose to live a life of sin. Also, hell is worse than you think. It just is. I know we've described it tonight. I know it's kind of depressing to talk about, but it's worse than that. Just like when we talk about heaven, we say, oh man, it's so much better than we can describe. Hell's way worse than this. It's worse than anything that I can say tonight. It's worse than any description that we can give. So whatever you have in your head of what hell is like, it's not accurate. It's 1/100th of how bad it will be. Another thing, hell is fair. At least for those who don't have a Calvinistic perspective of God, because in that case, God kind of decides apart from anything we do who will be saved and who won't be. Now that's not exactly fair to put people in hell just because of an arbitrary decision. But on the other hand, if it is based on what we have done, and if we are judged based on the works that we've done in this life, which we are, then certainly hell is a fair place, especially because it is 100% avoidable. And most of the time, it's really not even that hard to avoid hell. And yet there are many people that will go in spite of that. So then the lesson, of course, is avoid going to hell at all cost. At any cost. At every cost. Whether that is your friends, if you can't be friends with them because they're leading you toward hell, so be it. If it's your right eye that causes you to sin, what do? Pluck it out. If it's your right hand, you cut it off. Whatever it is that's standing in between you and heaven is going to land you in hell. And the truth is that you would be better off to live your 70, 80, 90, 100 years here in absolute pain and misery and end up in heaven than to live here as the most enjoyable time that you can have, the most successful that you can be. None of that will mean anything if you end up here. And just like the rich man, God will be able to say that in your lifetime you had your good things. Don't let this be the only life where good things happen to you. The other part of this, maybe it's more uncomfortable even, is that if we're trying to avoid hell at all costs, we also have to help others do the same. And we don't. Why? Well, most of the time it's because we're more comfortable not talking to people. And we take our comfort seriously. And we say, well, I don't really want to be uncomfortable, so I'm going to let these people wander off into hell. Jude, the only chapter, Jude, verse 23, describes our job as Christians of snatching some out of the fire. Well, that fire, of course, is hell. The thing is, if you get close to fire, it's a little bit uncomfortable. But if we're going to pull people out of that fire, we're going to have to make ourselves a little uncomfortable. Or we'll have to be satisfied being that callous toward those who are lost and who will spend eternity in hell, which just really isn't an option if we're going to be like Christ. So, with all of this, hell is a real place, and it's really bad, and it's a lot worse than I can describe. I'm not trying to preach fire and brimstone, but there's going to be fire and there's going to be brimstone, and we want to avoid it, and we want others to avoid it. Tonight, we want you to avoid it, and whatever we can do to make sure that happens, whatever you can do, because if you end up in hell, it's not my fault. Sorry. If you end up in hell, it's not your spouse's fault. It's not your kid's fault. It's not your co-worker's fault. It's not anybody's fault but your own. Tonight, if you need help to make sure that doesn't happen, or tonight if you need help to make sure that somebody else doesn't end up there, this is your opportunity. If there's anything that we can do for you, I ask you to come forward now as we stand, as we sing.